Beijing's night air was unusually still, wrapped in a soft blanket of winter fog that curled around rooftops and drifted through narrow alleyways. Inside a modest yet beautifully traditional courtyard house, Keanu Reeves sat alone in the dim glow of a desk lamp, reviewing pages of script for a secret film project no one outside the crew knew about. The courtyard walls kept the world quiet, giving him a rare moment of peace, a luxury he deeply valued. A kettle whistled in the kitchen. Keanu rose to pour himself a cup of jasmine tea when suddenly, boom! 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 3 thunderous knocks slammed against the front door, vibrating through the wooden frame. The cup nearly slipped from his hand. Keanu froze, startled, his heartbeat quickening as the silence of the house shattered into tension. Another round of pounding followed, louder and sharper this time. He glanced at the clock. 2:37 a.m. No one should be visiting at this hour, not crew members, not neighbors, no one. He set the teapot aside and walked slowly toward the front hall. His footsteps echoed across the polished wooden floor. The knocking continued, impatient, forceful, almost angry. Keanu paused a meter from the door and listened. Muffled voices barked orders in Mandarin. Flashlights flickered through the lattice windows. Shadows shifted outside, several silhouettes moving across the front courtyard stones. Something was wrong. Taking a steadying breath, he reached for the latch and opened the door halfway. What met him on the other side was unexpected. 4 uniformed Chinese police officers stood in formation, their jackets heavy with winter padding, badges gleaming under their flashlights. Their expressions were stern, unreadable, and entirely uninvited. Behind them, a black police vehicle idled with its headlights slicing through the fog. The lead officer stepped forward. Jiang Junjing Cha, Yuren Bao Gao Ni De Fangzi Yu Shengyin Wen Ti, Public Security Bureau. There was a noise complaint from your house. Keanu blinked in confusion. Noise? From here? I've been alone all night. There must be some mistake. The officer frowned, clearly irritated. The language barrier turned even simple sentences into a challenge. His tone carried suspicion. He spoke as if Keanu were already guilty of something. Another officer shone his flashlight directly into Keanu's face, sweeping it from his eyes to his shoulders and back again. It was unnecessary and disrespectful. Keanu stepped back slightly, shielding his eyes. Hey, no need for that. I'm cooperating. But the officers exchanged glances, misinterpreting his discomfort as attitude. The tension thickened instantly, like a storm cloud forming in the doorway. The lead officer's jaw tightened. His hand shifted toward the door as if expecting resistance. Keanu felt a chill run down his spine. What started as a simple knock had suddenly become something else, something heavier, more unpredictable. And deep inside, he sensed this was only the beginning. Keanu pulled the door fully open, letting the cold Beijing air sweep into the hallway. The officers stood rigidly, their breath misting through the fog. For a split second, Keanu hoped that once they saw his calm face and quiet home, the situation would settle. But their stern eyes said otherwise. The lead officer, a tall man with a square jaw and sharp brows, stepped forward again. His boots scraped against the stone courtyard as he lifted a clipboard. Identification, he demanded in Mandarin, tapping the paper with a gloved finger. Keanu nodded politely, though confusion pressed at his temples. Sure, give me a moment. He turned to fetch his passport from his travel bag. But as he started to close the door halfway, another officer shoved his boot forward, blocking it aggressively. The door jolted. Keanu paused, startled. The officer barked something sharp in Mandarin. I'm not closing it on you, Keanu said slowly, hands raised slightly. I'm just getting my passport. Relax. But the officer didn't understand, and the tone, even spoken softly, carried a defensive edge. His partner stepped closer, eyes hardening. The tension rose like a spark touching dry wood. Keanu exhaled, annoyed but trying to stay patient. He moved to the living room table where his passport rested. As he returned, he saw that the officers had already stepped inside the entryway without permission, scanning the front hall with flashlights as though searching for hidden guests. "Hey, hold up," Keanu said, voice firmer. "You didn't ask to come in." One officer glanced at him, unimpressed, muttering something to the lead. Their expressions darkened, and Keanu sensed they felt offended. Maybe they thought he was challenging their authority. Maybe they expected silence. But he couldn't just let strangers roam his rented house. He offered his passport anyway. The lead officer snatched it faster than necessary, flipping it open and examining the pages under the flashlight's glare. Keanu crossed his arms. "You know," he said, irritation slipping through despite his attempts to stay calm. "Most places knock politely. You busted in like a SWAT raid." The translator officer's eyes narrowed. His understanding of English wasn't perfect, but the word busted stood out. He repeated it harshly to the lead officer, and the group suddenly bristled. Keanu realized he'd stepped on cultural tension. Too late. The lead officer shoved the passport back at him. "Wei sheme ni dui jingcha zeyang shuohua." "Why do you speak to the police like this?" "I'm not being disrespectful," Keanu replied, voice rising slightly. "I'm explaining what happened." Flashlights flicked in his direction again. This time, longer, ruder. Keanu's jaw tightened. His patience cracked. "Enough with the lights," he said sharply, pushing the beam away from his face with a hand gesture. Instantly, the officers stiffened. The one holding the flashlight lowered his arm slowly, eyes cold and insulted. The room felt tighter now, as if the walls had shifted inward. Keanu could sense the officers' growing frustration, a silent storm gathering just beneath their stiff uniforms. Though he tried to steady his breathing, the atmosphere vibrated with tension, like a guitar string pulled too tight. The lead officer stepped closer, boots thudding heavily on the wooden floor. He spoke quickly in Mandarin, his voice clipped and sharp. "Ni de tai du hien bu hao. Women shi king ni pei he, bu shirang ni fan nu." "Your attitude is not good. We asked you to cooperate, not get angry." Keanu lifted his hands slightly, palms open. "I am cooperating. You just barged in with flashlights and—" Before he could finish, another officer interrupted, speaking over him. He pointed a stern finger toward Keanu's chest, misinterpreting his raised hands as aggressive instead of calming. Keanu stepped back, the gesture defensive, not hostile. But again, another misunderstanding. The officer muttered something harsh under his breath. The translator officer caught a piece of it, turning to Keanu with narrowed eyes. "Officer says you are provoking." "Provoking?" Keanu repeated, incredulous. "I'm literally standing here trying to talk. You're the ones yelling." His voice wasn't loud, but the frustration behind it carried weight. And even though his words weren't angry, they were filled with a firmness the officers took personally. The flashlight beam swept across his face again. Too close, too bright. Keanu flinched. "I said stop with the light!" he snapped, brushing his hand aside once more. This time the movement was sharper. Instantly the room shifted like a fuse had been lit. The officer closest to him stepped forward, shoulders squared, stare cold. His hand hovered near Keanu's forearm, as if ready to seize him. Keanu tensed. "Don't touch me," he warned quietly. But the Mandarin-speaking officers caught only the tone, not the meaning. They heard warning instead of boundary, threat instead of discomfort. To them, the foreign man was raising his voice, moving his hands, and refusing to obey. The lead officer exchanged a quick look with his team. A silent agreement. Something had tilted out of balance. "Tabu peihe." He is not cooperating. Keanu felt heat rising in his chest. He wanted to de-escalate, but every attempt only twisted into something worse. He took a breath, tried again. "Look, there's no problem here. I'm alone. No noise, no disturbance. This is all a mistake." But the officers weren't listening anymore. Their pride had been stung, their authority questioned, even if unintentionally. The misunderstanding had grown too large, spreading like wildfire in a dry forest. One officer pulled out a small notepad, flipping it open as if preparing a report. Another moved to block the hallway, preventing Keanu from stepping further into the house. Keanu felt the shift. The living room felt colder than before, as if the winter night had slipped through the officer's boots and settled into the floorboards. Keanu stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by uniformed men whose faces had hardened into stone. The once peaceful Beijing courtyard house now pulsed with unease. Flashlights swept across the walls, bouncing off framed photos, travel bags, and half-opened script pages on the table. Every inch of the house felt violated by their intrusive beams. Keanu's jaw tightened with each pass of the light. "Can you stop shining that in my face?" he said, keeping his voice steady, though frustration cracked through the edges. "I told you I'm cooperating. There's no reason to treat me like this." The officer holding the flashlight gave him a long, expressionless stare. Without breaking eye contact, he tilted the beam upward, but only slightly. Still disrespectful. Still unnecessary. Keanu exhaled through his nose, trying to center himself. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath. The translator officer heard one word: ridiculous. He relayed it to the lead officer, tone flat, almost accusatory. The lead officer stiffened. "'Ta women shi huangdang." "He says we are foolish." Keanu's eyes widened. No, that's not what I said. That's not even close." But the mistranslation had already poisoned the air. The officer's posture sharpened, as if bracing for defiance. One officer marched deeper into the living room, examining the window frames and corners. Keanu stepped sideways to prevent him from entering the bedroom hallway. "Hold on," Keanu said sharply. "You can't just walk all over the place. This isn't a search warrant." The officer paused, only to give Keanu a look of cold challenge. Keanu's heartbeat picked up. The lead officer walked forward, his boots echoing across the wooden floor. "Women yuquan li jancha shengyen wenti." "We have authority to check for noise complaints." Keanu gestured around the silent house. "Do you hear any noise? Do you see anyone here? You're turning nothing into something." But tone mattered more than words, and Keanu's tone had slipped into impatience. The officers heard irritation. They felt insulted. One officer stepped closer than necessary, invading Keanu's personal space. Too close. Keanu's body stiffened instinctively, shoulders tensing, chin lifting slightly. That tiny movement, simple self-protection, was interpreted as defiance. "Buyao dui jingcha jeyang." "Don't act this way toward police." Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, trying to gather himself. But the frustration that had been simmering since the moment they knocked now boiled just beneath the surface. He opened his eyes. "I'm tired. I'm alone. I didn't cause any disturbance, and I've been polite until you pushed too far." The translator caught "pushed too far" and translated it bluntly, too bluntly. "He says you have crossed the line." The air in the living room had become electric, thick, heavy, almost humming with tension. Keanu felt the officers closing in on him, not physically yet, but with their posture, their stares, their sharp breaths. Something invisible in the room had shifted, and he could sense it like a storm rolling in. The lead officer stepped forward until he stood just inches from Keanu, his chin lifted in silent challenge. "Ni detai du yijing chengwei wenti." "Your attitude has become a problem." Keanu stared back, breathing steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "My attitude? I opened the door. I answered your questions. You're the ones barging in, shining lights in my face, twisting my words." The translator officer caught only pieces of the sentence, and once again his translation was harsher than Keanu intended. "He says you are violent and rude." Keanu's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's not... What? No, that's not what I said." But the damage was done. The words hung in the air like a spark near gasoline. The officer with the flashlight clenched his jaw, lowering the beam fully now, not out of respect, but out of offense. His hand tightened on the flashlight as if imagining it were a baton. Keanu saw the gesture. "This is getting absurd," he muttered under his breath. The lead officer straightened his shoulders, authority radiating from every inch of his uniform. He took another step closer, violating Keanu's personal space completely. "Ruguo nibu tengwa, women jiangzai jeli zuochu jueding." "If you don't obey, we will make a decision here." Keanu felt a pulse of anger surge through him. "I'm not disobeying. I'm defending myself from harassment." Again, the translator misunderstood, translating harassment as abuse. The officers' expressions hardened like stone. One of them raised a hand, signaling for Keanu to calm down, but the gesture looked more like a warning. Keanu, exhausted and fed up, brushed the officer's hand aside, not forcefully, just enough to show he didn't appreciate fingers being waved in his face. That tiny movement was all it took. The room erupted in whispered intensity. Officers exchanged sharp, meaningful looks. One placed his hand near his belt. Another positioned himself behind Keanu, silently preparing. Keanu sensed the shift immediately. His instincts, honed by decades of stunts, films, and life experience, screamed back away. But backing away now would look like resistance. He remained still. The lead officer drew a breath, his voice low and final. Ni yi jing du sai women de gongzuo. You are obstructing our work. Keanu shook his head, disbelief etched across his face. Obstructing? I'm trying to explain. Gao Li. Enough. Two officers stepped forward simultaneously. Boots echoed across the floor. Hands hovered near Keanu's arms. The lead officer locked eyes with him, holding his stare for 3 long seconds before speaking the words that sealed the moment. For a long second, the world seemed to freeze. Keanu stood motionless, the officers circling him like tightening gears in a machine he could no longer control. The lead officer's words, temporary police detention, echoed through his mind, heavy and surreal. Keanu opened his mouth to speak, but the officers were already in motion. 2 stepped forward, one moving to his left side, the other to his right, their boots thudding rhythmically on the wooden floor. Their faces were expressionless, hardened by protocol. But beneath that professionalism was a flicker of bruised pride, a sense that Keanu had challenged their authority. Wait, Keanu said, lifting his hands slightly, palms showing calm. Let's talk about this. This is all a misunderstanding. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't refuse anything. But the lead officer was already speaking into a shoulder radio, his voice clipped and decisive. Xianchang Lingia Shukong, Lian He Chuli. Detain on sight. Proceed jointly. The phrase made the other officers stiffen in agreement. The translator officer stepped forward, this time avoiding eye contact, his voice colder than before. You must come with us now, no arguing. No arguing, Keanu repeated, incredulous. You've misunderstood every word I've said. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with disbelief. This is insane. I've worked in China before. I've always respected your laws. This is... The officer on his right reached for Keanu's wrist. Keanu stepped back, instinctively raising his hands. Don't touch me! I didn't do anything wrong! But the officers interpreted his movement, simple instinct, a reflex, as resistance. The lead officer barked a harsh command. Kongzita! Restrain him! Before Keanu could respond, both officers closed in. One grasped his left arm firmly, twisting it behind his back. The other seized his right wrist, pulling it downward toward the small of his back. Hey, stop! Keanu protested, not fighting, just startled by their sudden aggression. I'm not resisting! But they weren't listening. They had already committed to their decision. Cold metal brushed against his skin. The officer behind him snapped one cuff around his left wrist. With a quick jerk, they pulled his other arm into position and locked the second handcuff in place. The metal tightened, biting into his skin, not painfully but firmly, unmistakably. A hollow click echoed through the silent living room. Keanu's breathing hitched. His heart pounded, thudding against his ribs with a mix of adrenaline and disbelief. The situation had spiraled so fast he could barely process it. One moment he was reviewing his script. The next, he stood handcuffed in his own rented house, surrounded by officers who believed he had disrespected them. Listen, Keanu said, his voice lower now, almost defeated. Please, there's been a mistake. I didn't mean to offend anyone. The cold Beijing night swallowed Keanu the moment he stepped outside. The courtyard, normally serene and wrapped in soft silence, now felt like a cage with no walls. Fog clung to the lanterns hanging above the wooden gate, their red glow distorted by the haze. The ground was slick with dew, and Keanu's boots scraped across the stones as the officers guided him forward. His wrists throbbed against the metal cuffs. He wasn't fighting, just adjusting to the uncomfortable, unfamiliar restraint. Every movement reminded him of how surreal the moment was. Two neighbors had peeked through their courtyard doors, drawn by the police vehicles silently waiting in the narrow alley. Their eyes widened as they recognized the tall figure being escorted out. Whispers spread in hushed Mandarin. Nashinage Yanyuanma. Is that the actor? Keanu kept his gaze down. The last thing he wanted was to become a spectacle in a foreign neighborhood. But the officers made no attempt to shield him from view. They marched him with stiff, authoritative steps, as if emphasizing their control. "Watch your step," one officer muttered in English. Surprisingly, the first gentle instruction all night. Keanu glanced up but said nothing. The situation felt too fragile. One wrong word, one misunderstood sentence could shatter the little calm that remained. At the gate, the lead officer pushed it open, and the group emerged into the narrow, foggy Hutong alleyway. The police van's engine rumbled quietly, exhaust fumes curling through the air, its headlights cut through the mist like white blades. Keanu was guided toward it. "Can we talk first?" he asked softly. "Before we go anywhere?" The translator officer stepped beside him, expression unreadable. "Talking is for the station, not here." Keanu sighed through his nose, frustration swelling in his chest. "But this doesn't make sense. I didn't commit any crime." The translator hesitated only for a second, then looked away. Even he sensed the night had spun out of control. The officers opened the van's sliding door with a heavy metallic clank. The interior smelled faintly of gasoline and old upholstery. A steel bench stretched across each side, lit by a dim ceiling bulb that hummed under the cold air. Keanu ducked inside, careful not to stumble with his hands cuffed. The officers followed, two sitting on either side of him, leaving no space for movement. Their silence was heavy, almost suffocating. Once everyone was inside, the door slammed shut with a force that rattled through Keanu's bones. The van pulled away from the alley, tires crunching over uneven stones before rolling onto the main road. Fog swirled past the windows, city lights blurring into streaks of white and gold. Keanu stared straight ahead, his breathing slow, controlled, trying to stay calm. But the reality settled deeper with each passing second. He was being taken to a police station in a foreign country, handcuffed, misinterpreted, and powerless to fix the misunderstanding. The van rumbled through the Beijing streets, its engine humming a low, steady growl. Keanu sat stiffly between the two officers, the metal cuffs cold against his skin, the weight of the night pressing down on every breath he took. The fog outside wrapped the city like a blanket, muting the colors of passing neon signs into smears of soft blue, gold, and red. Inside the van, time stretched in slow motion. The officer on Keanu's left stared straight ahead, jaw locked, posture stiff. The one on his right kept glancing between Keanu and the window, as if reminding himself not to look impressed or curious. They weren't hostile now, just formal, closed, emotionless. And yet, Keanu could feel it, the tension lingering like static in the air. He shifted slightly on the steel bench, the cuffs digging into his wrists. "Can someone please loosen these?" he asked quietly. No response. He tried again. "They're too tight. I'm not resisting. I won't cause trouble." Still nothing. The translator officer, seated near the front, finally turned halfway toward him. "Protocol," he said simply. "Must stay this way. Protocol." Keanu almost laughed at the irony. Everything tonight had been protocol, even when it made no sense, even when it spiraled into chaos. He leaned back against the cold metal wall of the van, breathing out slowly. "This all started from a knock," he whispered to himself. The officer beside him glanced his way but said nothing. Outside, the van turned onto a wider avenue. Bright billboards glowed above the fog, advertisements, restaurant signs, silent reminders of the world's normalcy. Cars passed, bicycles drifted by, city life continued as if nothing was happening. as if Keanu Reeves weren't sitting in a police van being taken to a station for a crime he didn't commit. His chest tightened for a moment. Not fear, frustration. How do you fix a misunderstanding when no one listens? He tried again. Can I at least speak to someone who understands English better? The translator didn't turn this time. At station, he said. Later. Later. Always later. Keanu lowered his gaze to the floor. His reflection faintly shimmered in the metal paneling. He barely recognized himself. Tired eyes, tense jaw, quiet anger simmering beneath the surface. A sudden bump in the road jolted him forward. The officer on the right instinctively held out a hand to steady him, then quickly pulled it back as if worried someone would think he was showing sympathy. Keanu noticed. A tiny human moment, quickly swallowed by duty. Minutes passed. Or maybe they were seconds. Time had become a blur. Finally, the van slowed. The hum of the engine deepened. Through the fogged window, Keanu saw the looming outline of a large concrete building, harsh lights, barred windows, an iron gate. The police station. The tension inside the house had risen to a breaking point. What began as a routine verification visit had spiraled into a full confrontation, the air thick with stress, pride, and miscommunication. The living room was still cluttered from Keanu's earlier unpacking, open suitcases, scattered scripts, half-finished tea on the coffee table. But now, none of that mattered. All attention was locked on the heated moment unfolding between Keanu and the officers. The lead officer, a tall man with sharp features and an even sharper tone, stepped forward. "Mr. Keanu, you were repeatedly told to remain calm and follow instructions," he said, voice stiff with authority. "Your behavior is unacceptable." Keanu paced in frustration, running a hand through his hair. "I was calm until you started yelling at me in my own house," he shot back. His voice was raised, but not wildly, just enough to show he had reached his limit. "I'm cooperating now, but you barged in like I was hiding something." "We entered because you ignored our warnings," the officer snapped. "This is a lawful inspection." Keanu exhaled sharply. His patience was fraying like an overused rope. "You disrespected me first." The room tightened. No one moved. One of the younger officers shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the two men. He could feel the situation edging toward something irreversible. The senior officer finally stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Enough. Mr. Keanu Reeves, you are being detained for obstructing an official procedure and refusing lawful commands." The words struck the air like a hammer. Keanu froze. "Detained for what? I didn't attack anyone." "You raised your voice. You refused orders. You caused a disturbance," she replied coolly. "And you continued to argue after repeated warnings." Two officers approached slowly, professionally, not aggressive, but firm. Keanu instinctively stepped back, but he knew resistance would only make things worse. His breath trembled for a moment. It wasn't fear. It was disbelief. "Turn around," one officer said softly, almost respectfully. Keanu hesitated, then complied. His hands were guided behind his back. The cold metal cuffs clicked shut with a finality that echoed inside his chest. He closed his eyes briefly. A strange quietness settled over him, the kind of silence that comes after a storm finally breaks. The officers escorted him toward the door. As he walked through the home he had rented for the next 3 months, he felt the weight of everything that had gone wrong. The production meetings, the peaceful evening he had planned. Everything had been wiped away in a single hour of escalating tension. Outside, the night was dark and heavy. Police lights washed the street in flashing red and blue. Neighbors peeked from windows. A few whispered in disbelief. Cameras from passing drivers captured short, blurry clips. Keanu kept his head down, not out of shame but out of exhaustion. The police van rolled through the quiet, mist-covered streets of Beijing as midnight settled over the city. Streetlights flashed through the narrow windows, throwing long stripes of white across Keanu's exhausted face. The cool metal cuffs bit into his wrists, a constant reminder that things had spiraled far beyond anything he had expected when he walked into his rented house just hours earlier. Inside the van, 2 officers sat across from him, stern, silent, avoiding eye contact. The atmosphere was stiff, almost brittle. Keanu tried to relax, but the tension was impossible to escape. He could still hear echoes of the shouting match back at the house. The officers accusing him of ignoring procedures, him raising his voice after being pushed, the frustration boiling over. He regretted it, but the moment had already passed. Now he could only face what came next. As the van pulled into the Beijing Municipal Police Complex, a towering gray structure draped in cold fluorescent lights, a strange calm settled over him. Cameras pointed toward the entrance. Security beams scanned the vehicle. Iron gates clanked open. The sound was heavy, final, like the closing of a chapter. "Move," one officer ordered, still avoiding eye contact, as if they were unsure how to treat a world-famous actor who had just argued with them. Keanu stepped out, the chill in the air wrapped around him like a thin sheet of ice. Despite the surreal moment, he kept his composure. A few officers whispered, clearly stunned to see a Hollywood icon in their station, but their faces remained professional. Inside the processing hall, everything was bright, clinical, unforgiving. Keanu was led to a counter where a senior officer waited, arms crossed. She glared at him with a mixture of disappointment and command. "You created unnecessary trouble tonight," she said sharply. "I know," Keanu replied quietly. "I shouldn't have raised my voice. I was overwhelmed." His honesty shifted the atmosphere slightly. The officer stared at him for a moment, trying to read his expression. There was fatigue in his eyes, but also sincerity. She finally nodded to the clerk. "Begin paperwork." Hours passed. Fingerprints, statements, questions repeated in different tones. Keanu answered everything calmly now. No tension left, only acceptance. He wasn't treated like a star here. He was treated like any person who caused a disruption. And strangely, he respected that. At around 3 a.m., he was placed in a holding room, small, bare, quiet. A camera watched from the corner. A single metal bench sat against the wall. For the first time all night, he was alone. He leaned back, hands clasped, breathing deeply. In the stillness, he replayed everything that led to this moment. He realized he had let frustration control him, and it had cost him more than he expected. His peace, his evening, and now his freedom for the night. But in that empty room, a thought rose clearly.